A black single father encounters an 80-year-old man struggling to push a trash cart. He steps in to help, and the elderly man responds with heartfelt gratitude. John was a black man, known for his strength in the face of adversity. A single father to Thomas, a 6-year-old boy, his life revolved around taking care of his son after winning custody following a hard-fought legal battle. His marriage to his ex-wife had ended amidst betrayal, but he fought with all his might to ensure Thomas, who had chosen him without hesitation, stayed by his side. The victory in court was a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. Soon after, John lost his job due to company cuts, plunging him into a new wave of uncertainty. Without work and with bills piling up, he spent months searching for any opportunity that could bring him stability. Meanwhile, he did what he could with the little he had to make sure Thomas had what he needed. He dressed simply but with dignity, going out every day in search of work, facing challenges with a persistence fueled by the love he had for his son. Even as the difficulties mounted, John pressed forward, facing each day as best he could, even when it seemed the world was conspiring to keep doors closed. That morning, John prepared for another day of job hunting, as he had been doing for months. He put on his best clothes, simple but well kept, and left home early with a small stack of resumes in hand. His goal was clear: to find any opportunity that would allow him to support Thomas. The streets were busy, and John carefully observed each shop and business, looking for an opening. As the day wore on, the responses he received were discouraging, but he persisted. His determination wouldn't let him stop, even in the face of rejections and growing fatigue. When he turned a corner and reached a sloping street, something caught his attention. An elderly man, visibly frail, was struggling to push a wooden cart loaded with boxes and bags of recyclable trash. The hill was steep, and the effort seemed almost unbearable for the man, who stopped to catch his breath with each step. John hesitated for a brief moment, looking at his best clothes, but quickly decided to help. "Sir, do you need help?" John asked, already approaching. The elderly man looked up at him, surprised and weary. "Ah, son, that would be a great help. I don't have the strength I used to." "Let me take care of it," John said, firmly grabbing the cart and starting to push it. The weight of the cart surprised John, but he put all his strength into the task. As they moved forward, the elderly man walked alongside him, taking slow steps and wearing an expression that mixed gratitude with embarrassment. "Son, you didn't have to do this," the elderly man said, trying to pull the cart back. "I always manage somehow." "And you've been managing for a long time, it seems." "Now it's my turn to help," John responded, giving a brief smile. The elderly man shook his head, clearly moved. "It's not every day you meet someone like you. Most just look and walk right past." "We do what we can," John replied, pushing the cart steadily as sweat began to run down his forehead. When they finally reached the top of the hill, John stopped, taking a deep breath and turning to the elderly man. "There you go, sir. It's easier now, right?" The elderly man nodded, wiping his face with a faded handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. "You're a good man, son. I've worked hard all my life, but today I couldn't have done it without your help." "It was nothing, sir. I'm just here to help," John said, straightening up and getting ready to move on. Before he could say goodbye, something in the elderly man's expression caught his attention. There was a deep exhaustion, more than physical effort could explain. "Are you okay?" "It seems like you haven't eaten in a while," John said, concerned. "Well, things haven't been going well for a few days. I don't want to trouble you, but yes, I'm hungry," the elderly man replied in a humble tone. John thought for a moment. He reached into his pocket and felt the few bills he had saved. It was money enough for him and Thomas for a few days. After a brief reflection, he decided he couldn't leave the man in such a condition. "Come with me, sir. Let's get something to eat," John said, pointing to a simple diner just ahead. "Are you sure, son? I don't want to be a bother," the elderly man asked, unsure. "I'm sure. "Let's go," John replied firmly. The two entered the small establishment. The attendant behind the counter looked at them with curiosity. "What can I get you?" "A simple snack for him," John said, while the elderly man looked around as if he wasn't used to places like that. "You're not going to eat?" the elderly man asked, turning to John as he watched him order just one snack. John, somewhat uncomfortable, gave a quick smile. "Oh no, I'm not hungry. You eat up." The truth was the money he had wasn't enough for 2 snacks, but he chose not to say that. He knew that at that moment, the most important thing was to make sure the elderly man ate. When the snack arrived, the elderly man began to eat slowly, savoring each bite. John stood nearby, watching with a satisfied look, ready to say goodbye. "Well, I think everything's fine now. I'll let you finish in peace, and I need to continue my job search." Before he could take a step, the elderly man raised his hand in a gentle gesture. "Wait, son. Sit with me for a few minutes. I want to talk, if it's not too much to ask." John hesitated for a moment, but he realized the request was sincere. "Okay, just a minute. I need to move on soon." He pulled up a chair and sat next to the elderly man, who wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at John with a friendly smile. "You know, we never introduced ourselves. My name's Joseph. And you, son, what's your name?" "John," he answered, extending his hand for a brief handshake. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Joseph." "The pleasure's mine, John, and thank you again for what you did for me today. It's not every day you meet someone willing to help a stranger," Joseph said, his gaze firm but full of gratitude. John shrugged, trying to downplay it. "I just did what anyone would do. You needed help and I was there." "No, John, not everyone does that. You have a good heart and that's rare," Joseph said quietly, like he was considering the young man in front of him. "Tell me, do you have family?" "Yes, I do. A son, Thomas, 6 years old. He's everything to me," John replied with a faint smile. "We've been going through some difficulties, but I do what I can to make sure he has what he needs." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. 6 years old. Such a lively age. It must be tough raising a child on your own. "It is. My ex-wife and I separated a while back, and it was complicated getting custody of him, but it was what he wanted. Now I just want to give him a decent life, but with unemployment it's been a struggle." John paused, looking at his hands before continuing. "But I won't give up. For him, it's worth it." Joseph continued to listen in silence, his expression attentive. "You know, John, when I hear someone speak like that, it reminds me of earlier times when people didn't give up so easily. It's good to see there are still people like you." John smiled awkwardly and looked away. "I guess I'm just doing what any father would do." Joseph chuckled softly. "Maybe, but not everyone does, right? You're special, son. I can feel it." He paused for a moment, as if something important was about to be said. "You know, I've lived a lot, seen a lot of things, and sometimes life puts certain people in our path for a reason." John looked at him, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" Joseph sighed, and with a slow motion, he pulled an object wrapped in old, faded cloth from his pocket. He placed it on the table, unwrapping the cloth carefully to reveal what was hidden. An aged silver medallion, adorned with a raised design of an eagle, perched on a cactus, surrounded by small symbols that resembled ancient indigenous peoples. In the center, there was a polished jade stone. John leaned forward slightly, examining the details closely. "It's incredible," John whispered. "I've never seen anything like it. What is it, Mr. Joseph?" Joseph smiled faintly, running his finger along the edges of the medallion. "This medallion has been in my family for generations, John. It's more than just an object. Every detail here has a meaning. My father used to say this medallion was only passed on when someone truly deserved it." John raised his eyes, curious. "And what happened to it?" Joseph sighed, as if the memories weighed on him. My father was a simple man like me. He worked hard in the fields, never had much but had a big heart. When he was nearing the end of his life, he gave me this medallion and said, "Take care of it, Joseph. One day it will show you the way." I didn't understand what he meant back then. "But it seems like you took good care of it," John said, pointing to the gleam of the stone. "Yes, I did, but today it's just a burden I carry with me." Joseph paused, looking directly at John. "And that's why I want you to have it." John blinked, surprised. "Me? No, Mr. Joseph, I can't accept this. It's something from your family. It must be very important." "Listen, John," Joseph said, raising his hand as if asking for silence. "I've lived more years than I can count. I don't have children, no grandchildren. My wife passed many years ago, and my 2 boys left before me. Today, I'm just an old man who picks up what life leaves behind. This medallion, no matter how beautiful, no longer has meaning for me. It needs a new guardian." "But why me?" John asked, his voice almost trembling. "I just helped you with a cart." "Ah, son," Joseph smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "Sometimes it's not the big things that reveal who we are. You helped me when you could have just walked by like so many others. You didn't ask who I was or what I had to offer. You did it because your heart told you to. That's what this medallion needs, someone with a heart like that." John hesitated, looking at the object again. "Still, it's something very valuable. I don't know if I can accept it." "You can and you should, John," Joseph said, placing the medallion in his hands firmly. "I've lived long enough to know that life doesn't give gifts without a purpose. This medallion came to you because you will give it a new meaning. Take good care of it." John held the medallion carefully, feeling its weight in his hands. I don't know what to say, Mr. Joseph." "You don't have to say anything, son. Just promise you'll use it for something good." Joseph stood up slowly, adjusting his coat with deliberate movements. "Now it's time for me to go my way." "Wait," John said, standing quickly. "At least let me help you more. Do you need anything?" Joseph smiled, already moving away. "You've already done more than enough, John. Those who give the little they have to help others deserve much more. Never forget that." With a brief wave, Joseph left the diner, disappearing down the street. John remained seated, looking at the medallion in his hands, a mix of surprise and emotion filling him. John stayed seated for a few minutes in the diner, holding the medallion in his hands. He examined the intricate details of the piece, becoming more and more impressed. "Why me?" he murmured to himself, remembering Joseph's words. He carefully placed the medallion in his pocket and left the establishment, walking home with his mind full of thoughts. It had been a strange and unexpected day, but he knew he needed to focus on his job search the next day. When he got home, Thomas came running to greet him. "Dad, did you get a job?" the boy asked with a smile full of hope. John bent down and tousled his son's hair, trying to keep his tone upbeat. "Not yet, champ, but I'm close. Tomorrow will be a better day, I'm sure of it." He took the medallion from his pocket and showed it to the boy. "Look what I got today." "Wow," Thomas said, wide-eyed. "It's so pretty, Dad. Who gave it to you?" "A very kind man. He said it had helped his family, and now it's my turn to take care of it," John replied, smiling as he watched the curiosity in his son's eyes. Thomas gently touched the medallion. "Will it bring us luck, Dad?" John took a deep breath, thinking for a moment before responding. "I hope so, son. I really hope so." In the following days, John reflected deeply on the sentimental value of the object. Joseph's words kept echoing in his mind, and he felt a responsibility to take care of the medallion as a kind of legacy. However, his financial situation worsened every day. The bills piled up on the table, and the small stock of food left was quickly running out. He began to realize that, as much as he wanted to preserve the medallion, he couldn't ignore Thomas's needs. We can't eat hope, John thought, looking at the medallion in the evening light. He knew it could be worth something, but he had no idea how much. He decided to seek information, feeling torn between its material value and the story Joseph had shared. Yet each time Thomas asked for something simple, like milk or bread, and he couldn't provide it, the weight of the decision grew unbearable. One night, while Thomas was sleeping, John spoke to himself softly. "I know I said I'd take care of it, Joseph, but I don't know what to do anymore. If this really has any value, maybe it can help not just me, but also my son. And who knows, maybe even you." The next day, John took the medallion and went to a pawn shop in downtown. The attendant, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, looked up when John entered. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" the attendant asked in a monotone voice. John took the medallion from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "I'd like to know if this has any value." The man adjusted his glasses and carefully examined the medallion with a magnifying glass. For a moment, he remained silent, running his fingers over the details of the piece. Then he looked up at John with a serious expression. "Where did you get this?" the attendant asked, visibly impressed. "An old man gave it to me. He said it belonged to his family, and now it's my turn to take care of it," John replied, feeling a little uncomfortable with the question. "Do you know what this is?" the attendant asked, placing the medallion on the counter as if it were a precious artifact. John shook his head. "I have no idea. I just know it's old." "This isn't just old. It's a historic piece. Probably from the colonial period, maybe even older. The symbols and jade suggest it could have come from a family linked to indigenous peoples and the early dynasties. This is a rarity," the attendant said, his eyes gleaming. John swallowed hard. "And how much would this be worth?" The attendant adjusted his glasses again and answered, almost in disbelief at his own words. "I'd need to confirm with experts, but a piece like this, it could be worth a fortune, something that would change your life completely." John's head spun as he listened to those words. He had never imagined that the medallion could be so valuable. At the same time, he felt a tightness in his chest. Did Joseph know this? Did he give him the medallion without realizing its material value, or did he know exactly what he was doing? "I can make an offer now if you want to sell," the attendant said, leaning over the counter. John hesitated, looking at the medallion again. He thought of Thomas, the bills, the food that was running out. He also thought of Joseph and all that the medallion represented. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Make the offer." The attendant adjusted his glasses, carefully holding the medallion again and examining it under the light of the counter lamp. Then he looked at John with a satisfied smile. "Sir, my offer is an immediate payment of 2 million. John blinked, surprised, as if he had heard wrong. 2 million, he repeated in a near whisper. "Yes, sir," the attendant confirmed in a calm voice. "If you accept, I'll make the payment right now. The amount is more than fair, given the market and the historical importance of this piece." John was silent for a moment. 2 million pesos was an absurd amount, something he never imagined having in his hands. With this money, he could pay off all his debts, buy a house for Thomas, ensure a dignified life for his son, and maybe even start a business. Still, a part of him hesitated. The medallion was more than an object. It carried emotional significance, a connection with Joseph and his story. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm his thoughts. Thomas needs this, he thought, remembering his son's face, the need for a more stable future for both of them. Finally, he opened his eyes and with a firm nod responded, "I accept." The attendant smiled, satisfied. "Very well, sir. Please wait a moment while I prepare the payment." He went to a cabinet behind the counter, took a checkbook, and carefully began filling out the document. When he finished, he approached the counter again, extended the check to John, and said, "Here you go, sir. 2 million, as agreed." John took the check with trembling hands, looking at the numbers written clearly. The sum seemed surreal. "Thank you," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. He carefully put the check in his pocket as if holding something fragile. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the attendant. "Take good care of the medallion. It's special." "Don't worry, sir," the man replied with a nod. "It will be treated with the respect it deserves." John left the shop, still processing what had just happened. The weight in his heart remained, but the vision of a more promising future for Thomas drove him forward. He knew the decision was difficult, but necessary. With the money, John paid off all the debts that had accumulated during the tough months. He settled the outstanding bills, ensured he had enough food to get him through the coming months, and even bought a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it had enough space for him and Thomas, as well as a small yard where the boy could play. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he could breathe without the crushing weight of hardships. Days began to improve. John found work as a supervisor at a local warehouse, a simple but steady job that allowed him to care for Thomas and build a secure routine. The boys started attending a new school and quickly made friends. Each of Thomas's laughs filled John with a sense of purpose, as if all the sacrifices had been worth it. However, even with life getting back on track, John couldn't shake a feeling of unease. During the nights, while Thomas slept, he thought of Joseph and the medallion. He knew the elderly man had entrusted him with the object, but still, he felt a weight for having sold something so meaningful. And beyond that, something bothered him even more. The desire to find Joseph, to thank him, and share part of his newfound fortune grew stronger every day. In the silence of the nights, as he watched Thomas sleep, John decided that he needed to find Joseph, not only to express his gratitude, but also to share part of the money the medallion had provided. He deserves to benefit from this too, John thought. The next day, John returned to the hill where he had helped Joseph with the cart. The morning sun was shining brightly, and he walked slowly, looking around as if expecting the elderly man to appear at any moment. He asked a few people passing by if they knew an elderly man who used to collect recyclables with a wooden cart. "Oh yes, Joseph," said a fruit vendor. "He used to come by here frequently. A good guy, always smiling despite everything. But it's been a few days since I've seen him." "Do you know where he lives?" John asked, hopeful. The fruit vendor shook his head, thinking, "Unfortunately, no. He didn't talk much about his personal life. He just passed by here with his cart. But it's been a while since I've seen him." John thanked him, but the answer didn't bring the relief he had hoped for. He spent the rest of the morning asking other people in the street. Many vaguely remembered Joseph, but no one knew where he lived. As the hours passed, John felt increasingly discouraged. Still, his determination didn't give up. "If he's not here, maybe he's somewhere else he frequents," he thought. It was then that an idea occurred to him. The diner where they had talked was the next logical stop. John clearly remembered the table where they had sat and the words they exchanged. If Joseph had a habit of passing by there, maybe the attendant could help him. With his decision made, John headed for the diner. When he arrived, the place was quiet, with only a few customers sitting at tables. The attendant behind the counter looked at John with curiosity as he approached. "Can I help?" the man asked, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I hope so," John said, trying to hide his anxiety. "I'm looking for an elderly man named Joseph. We talked here a few days ago. He's an elderly, frail man with a wooden cart. Do you remember him?" The attendant narrowed his eyes for a moment, as if searching his memory. "Yes, I remember him. Joseph came by every now and then, always polite. You're the young man who was with him, right?" "Yes," John confirmed. "I'm trying to find him, but no one knows where he lives. Would you know anything?" The attendant sighed, his expression turning more serious. I'm sorry to say this, but Mr. Joseph passed away a few days ago. He had been very weak. John stood still, the words hitting him like a blow. He passed away, he murmured, feeling his heart tighten. Yes, the attendant confirmed. He was a good man, but his health had been fragile for a while. I think he knew he didn't have much time. John lowered his head, trying to process the news. He felt empty, as if he had lost something precious. Before he could say anything, the attendant continued. He left something for you. He said he knew you'd come. The man went to a drawer behind the counter and took out a small envelope, handing it to John. He asked me to keep this and give it to you. John took the envelope with trembling hands, thanked the attendant, and left the diner in silence. He found a bench in a nearby park and sat down, looking at the envelope for a few seconds before opening it. Inside, he found a letter written in shaky but legible handwriting. John, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means the medallion has fulfilled its purpose. I know you probably sold it, and I don't blame you for that. What I gave you wasn't just an object. It was a chance to change your life and your son's life. You're a good man, John, and the medallion only found its true value because it came into your hands. I have no regrets, only the certainty that I made the right choice. Use this opportunity to live with dignity and teach your son the value of generosity and kindness. John felt tears run down his face as he read. Joseph continued, My life was simple, but full of lessons. One of them is that we shouldn't cling to things, but to people and moments. I know you'll make good use of what you've received. I hope that, when the right time comes, you'll pass on what life has given you, just as I did. Take care of Thomas. Be the father you always wanted to be, and live with a light heart. With all my gratitude, Joseph. When he finished reading, John felt overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Sadness for the loss of Joseph, gratitude for the trust the elderly man had placed in him, and a deep sense of purpose. He carefully put the letter away, feeling it held more than just words. It was a constant reminder that kindness leads to lasting change. He knew he would never forget Joseph or the medallion, but he also knew its true value wasn't in its material worth, but in the transformation it had brought. And as Joseph had asked, John decided that when the time was right, he would pass on what life had taught him, fulfilling the cycle of generosity and hope that now formed part of his story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.